Sidney K. Broussard, Lieutenant Commander, United States Coast Guard, retired. I was commanding officer of the Coast Guard cutter Raritan, an ice-breaking harbor tug. I'm making this tape concerning the loss of the Escanaba, June 1943. The Escanaba was 165-foot, steam turbine, and her duty at the time of her sinking was as an escort vessel for convoys between Boston, as I remember, and Greenland, Narsarsuaq, Greenland, on the southwest coast of Greenland. The commanding officer of the Escanaba was Carl UNO Peterson, Peterson, I think, an academy graduate. The executive officer was Robert Prowse, a lieutenant, and he was an academy man. Both fine officers. The Escanaba had experienced engine trouble earlier in the year and had to remain in Narsarsuaq across the dock from where the Raritan moored. And we had come to know the officers and crew pretty well.
It was approximately 5 a.m. in the morning. We were in a convoy. We had one large transport ship that we were protecting. This transport had many civilians aboard. Men that had worked up in Greenland. During the time they were there, they had built air bases. This is the knowledge that I have of the personnel that were there. The entire convoy protecting this one ship was made up of Coast Guard vessels. Offhand, I can't remember them all, but I do remember the Storis, the Raritan, the Escanaba, and the Mojave. Now, as I say, it was approximately 5 in the morning. I had gone up on wheel watch. I was a helmsman. And the sounds of motors came through our sound gear. There was a sound of machine gun fire or something going. I was told later this was possibly the propeller from a torpedo. And suddenly the ship was hit. I had made a turn. I had been given an order on the helm. We were zigzagging, and the officer of the deck had given me another course to steer, and I had just started to steady up on the course when this great explosion was heard. Now, the impression that I've got is that the ship was hit in the center, and that the two ends, bow and stern, rose to meet each other. I wasn't any different than a lot of other helmsmen at the time. We had orders to wear our life jackets constantly, but mine was laying down at the wheel on the deck. I picked the life jacket up, put it on, and I started to tie the top string. I then got to the door of the wheelhouse, and it seemed as though I just touched it and the door itself fell right out. And I stepped onto the wing of the bridge, and the next thing I knew, I was swimming.
Next thing I knew, the general alarm bell went off in the cabin where I was sleeping, and somebody came to the head of the ladder, you'd call it the stairs, I guess, and hollered down something like, "Come on, Captain, the Escanaba's gone." So I bailed out and went up the ladder and took a look where the Escanaba ought to be, and there was nothing over there but like a cloud of water vapor or steam or smoke or something. Went up to the bridge and headed over for the explosion area, and Storis was over there. Storis blinks over and says, "Go on in and pick up survivors." So I went on in.
I swam away from the ship, but as she went down, I was drawn down with it. How far, I don't know. The explosion, we assume, of either the boilers or depth charges, whatever it was that exploded, did help us back to the surface. The water temperature was 33, as I understand. We started to swim away from the ship. There were a few men in the water with me. Melvin Baldwin was one of them. A few other seamen. The commanding officer was there. The executive officer. And I can remember the commanding officer to this day pointing to the strongback that Baldwin and I were clinging to when they pulled us out of the water. He had instructed us to swim to the strongback. He said, "Get over to that strongback and hang on to it." There were other men in the water with us, as I had stated, and it seems as though, due to the cold water itself, whether these men couldn't swim or what their problem was or the situation itself, but it seemed that they all seemed to disappear. But Baldwin and I were on this strongback, and when they pulled us out of the water, my right arm was more or less frozen to it. We were both unconscious.
And she blew, there was nothing except scattered debris on the water. There was nothing. Cloud of steam, smoke, or whatever it was. Through all the litter, I looked over the port, and it was a strongback. It's a spar, wooden spar, that holds the boat out. Whatever boat it is, whether it's a motor launch or monomoy surf boat or whatever they're using. I guess you call it a lifeboat. And hanging on to this thing appeared to be two men covered with oil, no life jackets, just barely hanging on. To the starboard, over to the right, was an officer in full uniform, khakis, cotton khakis, with his shoulder boards, the whole thing. He had everything but his medals on. And he still had his cap on, life jacket, floating good. Bob Prowsey, good friend of mine. I put her right alongside the spar and stopped the ship, and at first the crew threw a couple of lines over, but these men were so cold, they were in such trauma. One, from the explosion of the torpedo on a small ship like that, it's quite a shock. Comes right up your feet to your brain. The boys threw a couple of heaving lines over, and these two men, well, the one guy appeared to be unconscious. They were so traumatized by the cold and the the explosion itself, that they couldn't reach over and get a line, or if they'd reached over and gotten it, they wouldn't be able to hang on to it while you pull them in. So some of my men went into the water, and they no more than hit the water and started trying to work on these people when the shock of the cold hit them and just about knocked them out. And I've seen people freeze to death in water like that more than once. Doesn't take long. So some of the other of our crew members first tried to reach down and grab, and then some of them got in the water, and the same thing happened. And these were young men, and all hands, except for the chief engineer, he was down below on the engines, were involved, including the cook. And it took everybody in our crew not only to get these two Escanaba survivors up, but our own men that had gone down and gotten into the water. But they grabbed on and pulled and heaved and everything else. And of course the Escanaba was an oil burner, and that bunker oil is very thick, especially when the water's that cold, and it's slippery, and it's just a bloody mess. But they heaved and pulled and yanked, and they kind of come up like in a bunch, in a bundle or something, onto the deck. And they were young, thank goodness for that. Then I wiggled her over alongside of Bob Prowsey, and he, when I had come over, he recognized the ship, he recognized me, and he waved at me. And I'm certain that he knew what I was going to do. I mean, I didn't ignore Bob by any means. My reaction, and it would be the reaction of anyone. I don't care what you're doing, whether it's a car wreck or something like this. As I said, you help the people that need help the most. And these two people were just a hair's breadth removed from death. So, and it took all this time, you know, I mean, must have taken pretty near 5 minutes, maybe more, to get these two Escanaba survivors and our gang that were in the water, to get them all back on deck and that sort of thing. Okay. They took the two survivors and helped their shipmates that were in tough shape into the crew's mess. The crew's mess room, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's on the main deck. And the two survivors, two young fellas, came around pretty quick. And then they put Bob Prowsey, Lieutenant Prowsey, on the mess table and started trying to give him artificial respiration. On Mr. Prowsey, it didn't work. So one of the people came up to the bridge, and I was on the helm then. I sent the helmsman down because they needed everybody they could get to do what they were doing, and said, he's not coming around at all, Captain. I really mourned the loss of those good people on that ship. They were a nice bunch of people. all of them. You do what you can, you do your best, and more than that, no one man can do. As to making the decision as to who to bring out first and thereby save them, I had the feeling that I was going to get all three of them alive. That if anybody died, it would be the two that I pulled out first. But that hypothermia is so fast, it's unbelievable, that particularly if you have suffered the trauma, the shock of a torpedo with all that torpex blowing up right behind you on a ship that's only 165 feet long. I mean, that wasn't a big ship at all, it was a small ship. And when one of those babies hits you, and then it's my conviction that the depth charge storage down below decks and the ammunition down below were a sympathetic explosion. In other words, when a torpedo exploded, everything down there blew up, including the boiler. Almost like one explosion, and of course that was, she just disappeared. I mean, it was like turning off a light, I guess. Not that I was up there looking at it, but in fact the chief wasn't. Chief Force was on watch, and he was looking out ahead and checking the helm and that sort of thing, and then there was this flash, you know, to starboard, and he looked over there, and all it was a cloud of steam or smoke or both, a gout of water, you know, an eruption of water in the air. And
that in the 22 years that I have been coming up here, whether it is that today I am the last one or whether it was the service itself, but last night the impact of what actually happened 22 years ago to me for the first time has really struck home. And I hope that I can come back here to Grand Haven each and every time they have the services, only to honor all of these men that I knew and worked with on the Escanaba. To me, it has been something that I felt I should do, not only because I am one of the survivors, but because all of these men have gone down with their ship